Hello and welcome to Season 4, Episode 12 of Logicast, the AWS News Podcast brought to you by Logicata. I'm Carl Robinson, CEO and co-founder of Logicata, and I'm joined today, as one might have come to expect, by AWS Lead Cloud Engineer, John Goodall. How are you doing today, John?
You fumbled that.
I did a little bit. I hadn't planned it, never do. But sometimes it trips off the tongue better than others.
I'm all right. I can't complain. I've just got to get this in shot because I'm amazed by this. I was in the gym at the weekend and I was annoyed by the lack of barbell clips, so I bought myself some. And look at how green that is. That's amazing. That's brilliant.
Do you know, if I'd seen that sitting around somewhere, I would have had no idea what it was. Never seen one of those things before in my life, I don't think. So,
Well, you're not a regular inside a gymnasium, are you?
I'm not a regular
You
inside.
run outside.
I'm not a regular inside a gymnasium, but I did walk past the brand new Pure Gym in New Haven the other day on my way to Halfords, and noticed that the local Platinum Gym had hired a Luton van with their logo and prices all over the side of it and parked it outside the brand new Pure Gym. So I thought, genius marketing there. I'm not sure the Pure Gym guys would have been overly impressed, but that's
they
about as close as
hand over fist. They do. They make money.
I'm sure they do.
Fist.
Yeah,
and the whole reason I bought these is what has colloquially been called peak Pure Gym behavior. People just hanging on to everything, not putting stuff back where it's supposed to be, not re-racking things, people setting up 4 barbells full of stuff. It's like, you've got 2 arms. At most you can use 2 for like, but what are you playing at?
Well, maybe it's not quite so bad in Platinum Gym. So if you happen to be in New Haven and you're looking for a change of gym, I don't work for Platinum Gym, but maybe I can get them to sponsor this episode. Anyway, we are joined today by a very special returning guest. I think this is your 3rd time round, Johannes, by AWS hero Johannes Koch. How are you doing today, Johannes?
I am doing great. Thanks for having me again, John and Carl. It's a pleasure to be on with you guys as always.
Are you a gym bunny or a gym rat or whatever?
I am not a gym
animal?
bunny. No. I do handball, right, which is a pretty cool sport as well. And I go to regular trainings with the team. And I'm also a coach now for my son. So that's the kind of sport that I do. And gym is boring, to be honest, right? At least for me, right? It's like doing something alone and taking care of yourself. I'm more the guy that goes and drinks a beer, right? That's the main reason of going to the training.
I quite like it. You turn your brain off for a bit. You just don't think. Pick heavy stuff up for a while.
Yeah, that's one of the aspects of going to the gym. That's correct. But at the end, you're still for yourself, right? And I like the team kind of approach, right, where you need to work together and things like that. I'm not a classical nerd sitting in my sitting in my home the whole time. That's not really me.
Fair enough. Well, we are not here to talk about our weekend recreational pursuits. As regular listeners to the podcast will know, once a week I curate a list of AWS news, which I share via my weekly AWS News Roundup newsletter. And then John and I pick a set of articles that we'd like to talk about with our guest. And it was slim pickings this week, we have to say. We weren't quite sure what's causing the current news drought, whether it's the upcoming Reinforce conference or the summit season, which is almost upon us, but not a huge amount in terms of AWS news this week. But we have managed to find some articles that we would like to talk about nonetheless. And the first is actually Johannes's chosen specialized subject. It's his area of focus and expertise. So this is a feature announcement that AWS CodePipeline now supports invoking pipeline execution with a new action type. So as this is your chosen specialized subject, Johannes, I'll come to you first to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, thank you. Carl, I think CodePipeline is an interesting service these days. I don't know how much you followed in the past few weeks, there's been a bunch of pretty cool announcements coming out of the CodePipeline team. A bunch of very interesting things that were required for the service to actually be usable, I would call it. Right, and this one is pretty interesting because you can now directly execute other code pipelines out of an existing code pipeline. While this sounds like a thing that everyone else is already able to do, right? It's something that CodePipeline was never able to do yet, right? So you were never able to trigger another code pipeline natively out of CodePipeline. That's what you can do right now, and I think that's pretty good. Before we talk about other code pipelines things, because Carl, you promised me 25 minutes code pipeline and then 5 minutes about the other articles. John, what do you think?
I'm not a massive user of CodePipeline. I'm using a little bit at the moment for a client project, but historically I've been a user of things like GitLab and GitHub Actions and CI and that kind of jazz. So I've not been a great fan of CodePipeline. It's an interesting one because historically it was, okay, you can run code build, cool, and then you can do anything you like. And then there was this arbitrary, you can run scripts, you can run a command directly in the pipeline, and then you could do this that way, and that was fine. And now there's a direct SDK integration, and it seems to be following, I don't know if there's like an overall kind of strategy, but it's following the same sort of pattern that I'm seeing with step functions as well, where you're just getting more and more and more direct SDK integrations without having to write this boilerplate Lambda code or shell code or whatever to achieve this, which is nice to see. I don't know how big a use case this actually is, though. How many people are really choreographing pipelines together? I've always thought of that as an anti-pattern, personally.
Okay, it depends. So I would say that in enterprises, this is a very common thing, right? That you also need to be able to tie in pipelines that do different steps together, right? You can also then harden the security of the pipeline roles that are being executed because of that. And it can also do stepwise deployment, which makes it a little bit easier, right? If you have the possibility to split that out. Or you can even delegate responsibility for parts of the pipelines into different teams and different owners, right? So I like the possibility to do that, right? I haven't looked at the feature myself yet, to be honest. But the last two features that I looked at were kind of going in the same direction as you mentioned, but not really full thought through, I would say. Yeah, let's talk about those other two that we had like in the past, I think 3 weeks. We had an announcement of CodePipeline being able to natively deploy into EC2, and we had an announcement of CodePipeline being natively deployable into Kubernetes, so EKS Helm charts, right? And if you look at those closely, because I've been playing around with those, right? The one deploying to EC2 uses SSM. It's unusable for a lot of enterprises who disable SSM on purpose, right? That means they just wrapped around an SSM command under the hood, right, in CodePipeline. Same for deployments into Kubernetes clusters. They have added the possibility you can now execute Helm charts, or you can also directly apply manifests. But if you then look for integrations with the service itself, you don't get anything, right? And so reading this news post makes me feel like, okay, there is something that is able to integrate that now, but it's implemented in the simplest possibility, and it doesn't really address the problems that I have with CodePipeline, right? Happy to talk about those. But before we go there, let's ask Carl what he thinks about this one, just to put him on the spot. John, what do you think?
Well, I usually respond with a question. So I was actually curious when you mentioned that prior to this feature, CodePipeline couldn't execute other pipelines. What was the workaround for that? Did you have a workaround? Was the workaround use another tool, or was the workaround do something crazy with lambdas or something?
It depends on how much you want to look back, right? So previously you could have executed lambdas or your own commands. You could have executed code build projects, and the code build project steps would then trigger another code pipeline using SDKs or stuff like that. That was possible, right? But as John mentioned, it's always clunky to put that around, right? And you don't get a native integration somehow to also see that, right? So without Johannes looking at the feature, what I would expect is now if I have connected pipelines, when I have a pipeline execution, I will directly see the related pipeline, and I will even get a graph going forward that actually shows me the pipelines being related. I think I'm wrong, but I'm going to try, and then I can talk about that, right? But essentially, this would really give you a possibility to overlook a certain deployment scenario, right? As another example, if you look at the way that, so there's an article in the Amazon Builders library around how Amazon does deployments, right? I'm sure that both of you have read that, which talks about that concept of regional deployments and then rollouts across multiple regions and how that actually fits together. With this code pipeline functionality, you can now reuse the same code pipeline infrastructure as code in all of the regions and trigger that from one central pipeline that actually orchestrates the other code pipelines. So it kind of makes sense, right? You can then also have a version of that code pipeline that is specific to one specific region because there's a service missing or something like that. So I see benefits of it, but I fear that we just connected things instead of making it a real tool where you can see the connections between those different pipelines. As an example, that you can do that with other vendors, right?
So what are the problems and the challenges, apart from the one you've just highlighted there, that you alluded to with CodePipeline?
Every time I try CodePipeline, it's too slow for me. So I always get disappointed because of waiting for the different steps and stages, and it kind of go after another. And one of the things, the other thing is, I pretty much like the possibility of having pipelines together with the code that you have. In CodePipeline, you can do that, and you can achieve that, especially with CDK pipelines, but it's still not the same thing, right? Because you cannot really write a YAML file or something like that. You really need to write TypeScript, Java code, or something like that. If you write CloudFormation, it gets really nasty because it can't really see how the different steps are being executed, right? And I think that's something that I'm still missing. And then if we want to talk about the possibility to integrate source code in AWS these days, that's an interesting freaking mess as well, right? Yeah, I don't know. Let's see where this goes. But there is so much things that sometimes makes it complicated to use CodePipeline, right? In terms of just using GitHub Actions, right? Which is kind of the standard these days, as we need to admit.
So I know we use GitHub Actions for various projects. John, what's missing from CodePipeline to make it comparable?
Lots of things. As Johannes says, it's very hard to get it to just live in source. So the various pipelines that we've written for this particular client project, we're only using CodePipeline and Code Build as a backup option because we had to get inside of VPC, and doing that with things like Actions and GitLab and all that jazz means you have to start rolling your own runners, and then it was kind of, I sort of viewed it as the lesser evil, effectively. So I didn't want to have a long-term runner to look after. So we kind of went down this route. And it was CodePipeline and Code Build and Code Suite generally, to me, has always felt like the lesser evil whenever I've used it. It's never been my first choice. It's been, oh, that'll solve the problem. And what also, it's not really a problem with CodePipeline, but this doesn't mesh to me with the decision to get rid of code commit, because they got rid of code commit and then they've put a whole bunch of other things to improve the rest of Code Suite. It's like, well, is it a separate product team that made that decision? Where did that come from? Because it's not the maths doesn't maths for me. It's I don't know what this is. I don't know why.
Okay, so we're gonna get to the 25 minutes if you challenge me like that.
I'm just putting rage bait out for the dev tools
here. Gosh, yeah, it's an interesting conversation. So let's answer the first question: where did the team come from? With a counter question, and please don't answer it live as we're recording this. Look at the Code Catalyst announcements from the past few months. Secondly, to answer the comment around it doesn't make sense to have an investment on CodePipeline but not on Code Commit, I think that's a totally different conversation, right? CodePipeline has a totally different use case and a totally different people that you want to address, so a different set of customers, right? CodePipeline, the way that I look at it, is a little bit more on the enterprise side of the customers, right? It's not the stuff that the people that you and I talk to in the community. It's the enterprise customers which are really hard bought into AWS, that have certain aspirations of having everything running on AWS, including their CI/CD pipelines. That's where CodePipeline plays an important role, at least based on the conversations that I've been having with a lot of enterprises here as well. What I think is more difficult is the positioning around how do I get CodePipeline and Code Build measured together, right, to be successful as different services. What's the purpose of that? And how do I make that more and simpler, integrated into existing things? And then that brings me back to reInvent 2024 around, okay, we're going to work together with GitLab. We now have a lot of things being done in GitLab, but then nothing really following up on that. Right. And I think that's a very important question that you're asking here, John, around what's the overall strategy behind that, right? And where is this going? And I've been asking that question a few times, and I'm still hoping to get an answer.
I mean,
it's
the
possible
all-in
that
on
nobody
AWS.
knows.
Nobody knows. The all-in on AWS thing for me, again, it doesn't mesh with getting rid of code commit, because with code commit, you could be all in on AWS, and now you can't again unless you roll your own Git servers. Because like I get that viewpoint, but it and yeah, they're different tools entirely. But when you take something like GitHub, that is an all-in-one tool that does code commit style sort of Git bits and pieces and the code build, code pipeline kind of together of here's a pipeline stringing it all together, albeit with significantly poorer native integrations because it's just all YAML and pre-run actions and that kind of thing. So you have to do more work, or someone else has already done the work. And it's an interesting collection because they've broken the tool sets out, whereas the other providers have gone, here's everything together, that's what you've got.
Yeah, and once again, right, I think what Carl just said around maybe nobody knows what the strategy is, that might be a good point to look at, right? But if you look at the announcements of the past month, look at the code pipeline ones. There were a bunch of really, really cool things that make the code pipeline team to be able to do Me Too, right? And it was essentially CodePipeline V2 announced last year, I think in June or something like that, right? Which made that happen because that triggered a lot of innovation under the hood. Now, what's going to come next? I don't know. I'm curious to see that, right? Having the building blocks of code build and CodePipeline has some positive things as well, right? And if you think of Matt Garman's keynote, where he was kind of spending 1 hour or something like that, trying to explain us builders why AWS is still the cloud provider of choice, because they offer all of the building blocks that you need to deliver services and products end to end, then investing into CodePipeline and into CodeBuild might make more sense than into all-in-one solutions that they have been investing in before.
Well, I guess watch this space. It was a slightly flippant comment that maybe nobody knows, but perhaps the aeroplane is being built in flight, as it often is with these things. So, the strategy will avail itself at some point. But on that note, let's move along to our second article for this week. This is an article on the AWS security blog about how AWS KMS CloudWatch metrics can help you better track and understand how your KMS keys are being used. So, John, thoughts on this?
This is an interesting one because I think it comes fairly recently off the back of some news that we saw out the community of people hitting rate limits, or rate limits had gone up and their bill had just gone whomph because they weren't caching the key anymore, and it went from costing a few cents a day to several dollars a day, and all of a sudden that was a several $1,000 bill. So this is, I don't know if it's reactionary. I don't know what the blog post pipeline looks like and how far out they write these things. But this is the sort of thing that you should know, because using KMS keys costs money. Everything in AWS costs money, after a fact. Using KMS keys costs money, and you want to know how much of them you're using. There's ways and means of reducing your usage of them without not using them. What do I mean by that? Things like caching them, so that whenever you go and run a particular Lambda or get things out of S3 or whatever, the service isn't going back to KMS to get the key to then go and do the decryption and kind of all that jazz. It's caching it locally, and that's better because you're not going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and hitting the API all the time. So you do need to know how much you're using, and you need to kind of understand your usage and work out if it's worth the engineering time to reduce it, because we all like to, what's the term, shaving the yak. We as engineers, we love yak shaving. We love going down the rabbit hole of how much can I save on this, if you're that way inclined. But when you work for a company, like I've said a few times in various blog posts and on this, your time isn't actually free. It might be free for you, but it's not free for your employer. So you need to know whether it's worth spending the engineering time, which is salary money, to reduce the bill or not. If it's a hobby project, sure, absolutely, you need to get that as low as possible. If it's for a big corporate, they could probably eat a few quid a day of KMS fees without having to think about it. So you can't make that decision without the data, and that's what this is showing you how to get.
Well, first of all, as a non-engineer, I think I require an explanation of the term "shaving the yak" because it's definitely the first time I've heard that one.
No, I'm not doing that on here. Everyone's just gonna have to Google that one.
Fair enough. I'll Google it afterwards then if it's not safe for work. But another more serious question: does it cost more to use CloudWatch metrics to track your KMS costs? Because I think we've often quipped about the fact that CloudWatch can be the most expensive bill line item in certain scenarios.
That's typically logs rather than metrics that cost the money, because the ingest fees for CloudWatch logs are, once you get past the free tier of I think 5 gig, are quite punitive because they're 50 cents per gigabyte for ingest. Metrics have a cost, but they're nowhere near as bad as that. So odds are no, they won't cost anywhere near as much. So I wouldn't worry too much about that.
I think one of the more important things here to think of is like, why is this coming now, and why hasn't this been there for like years, right? So if we look at a bunch of the reInvent sessions, right? If you go to YouTube, there's a bunch of people that always talk about observability needs to be built in, and you directly need to access all of the information out of the box without having to do a lot of things to make this happen. And then we get in 2025 a blog post in the security blog around how to get these metrics. It kind of feels a little bit like, okay, I'm a little bit too late with making this accessible to end users, right?
I don't think there's been a single episode of this podcast in the last 3 seasons where we haven't said, why haven't they built this for me? It's just another one of those. We sort of have come to expect this, I think, or accept at any rate. This is a feature that should have already been built. It hasn't been. And then the team that wrote the blog have gone, well, here's how to plug that gap yourself. Nah.
But I don't understand, John. Maybe you can help me explain that. Why is this now in CloudWatch? Why is this not a possibility in the KMS service, right? Where I can then display the metrics, because that's where observability should actually go into.
Yeah, exactly. That's the whole, they should have built this. This should be part of the service, but it isn't. Yeah,
and the blog post itself, to be honest, right? And I think we'll have it linked in the show notes. It's not like very rocket science, right? There is no chance to directly implement that for me in infrastructure as code or things like that. So, not wanting to moan about it, right? But they could have invested 50 minutes more and provide a CloudFormation template to actually deploy those metrics, and then give me a dashboard that I can actually directly access to give me all of those metrics that they now have around KMS, right? And potentially also some of the other additional information that you need for a KMS key, like how many times is it being used? Do I have keys that are not being used anymore? All of that stuff, right? Would have been great to expand on that blog post a little bit. And yeah, maybe I'm kind of holding people accountable here, right? But you should try to raise the bar instead of giving people just what you have, right? And, that's at least my thought when you pinged me this article and I was reading it. It was like, okay, cool. And now I go and do all of those manual clicks myself. No, that's not what I want to do, right? And iterating on what we said earlier, okay, give me a code pipeline that I can directly execute that deploys this into my account.
Well, there's a feedback invitation at the end of the article. So, perhaps we can link to this chapter on our YouTube channel, and your feedback can be given directly to the authors.
We can. That's a good idea. Yeah.
I haven't seen that before on any blog post, just more generally. I hadn't seen that. And I read quite a few of them for, this podcast and other reasons. And I think that's the first I've seen where they say, here's a thread, we'll go and start a thread on repost, which, if you're not familiar, is AWS's answer to Stack Overflow, effectively. Ask questions, start a thread, do it over here. I'd not seen that on a post before.
But there is a comment section below as well. And it actually integrates with the Builder ID, which is pretty neat. So if you're listening to this and you don't like the blog post, please flood it with comments. And then
don't at us, at them.
As far as I can see, there are none at the moment. So, if tomorrow there are, then we'll know that it's as a result of Johannes's invitation to flood this post with comments. So, but the instructions are very specific, though. If you have if you have feedback, put it in the comments. If you have questions, then use the repost thread. So,
well, then
there we go.
Add feedback.
But the article will of course be linked in the show notes, so if you, like Johannes, feel compelled to give some feedback, then check it out and take the invitation.
And if you don't like Johannes, don't put it in the comments.
On that note, let's move along to our third article for this week. This is another feature announcement, but of course, moving now into AI. So this is an announcement this week that there are new upgrades to the Amazon Q Business browser extension. So I've never used Amazon Q Business nor the browser extension. I don't know if either of you guys have any experience with this.
No, but I just wanted to call it Clippy again. So we now have a Clippy browser extension.
I'm not allowed to install these kind of browser extensions at the moment, and I don't want to actually.
Corporate John, security policy.
Exactly. John, I assume that you have installed it and you have used Clippy multiple times a day. Tell me more about it.
Oh dear. I don't get it. I don't get this. It's to an extent, it feels like, okay, yes, you've already got the browser extension and you've updated it. That's great. Well done. Well done. Shout about it. All the rest of it. Meet your customers where they are. And if they want to use browser extensions, then gravy. It's giving access to more things, so you can change custom conversation context, and you can access your company knowledge bases, and it will deal with images in attachments, which is good. If you've got these things in chat and they happen to be in your browser, then great, wonderful, and you can just do it where you are. I'm not a great user of this particular browser extension. In fact, I've never used it, and I don't think I ever will. But I do use lots of extensions for various things. And yeah, okay, I can understand making that particular extension more useful. I get that, particularly if you're in, I don't know, let's say a corporate environment where this has been pre-approved and it's, here's your company knowledge base and here's the questions, and you work in, I don't know, a call center or something. And that's the sort of place where you might see this kind of thing. It's right there. There's the information I need. I don't have to go and look something up, and it's just a workflow improvement. So it's good. It's a nice change. It's a nice improvement to the service. I don't really know how well used this service is or is going to be. And I don't know if those metrics are ever going to be surfaced, because who talks about, I don't think I've ever seen AWS talk about browser extension installs.
And I think the biggest takeaway from me on reading the article is that AWS is addressing new audiences with these kind of things, right? So previously it was the builders, the Johns of the world, and the Carls were just making the money, paying the money, right? But the Johns were reading those news articles. And now with the AI world, we're starting to target also business users and actually end users, right, of the different tools that they are kind of bringing out. Q Business being one of the good examples for that, Q Developer being another one, right? I think there is a lot of interesting movements over there, and seeing where the shift of target audience from AWS is coming from, right? And I think that's one of the main takeaways out of this one, right? This is really targeted at consumers, at end users of this Q Business service, right? It's not targeted as Johannes and John, who want to make sure that Q Business shows only the information that a specific Carl needs to see, right? And this is targeted at Carl to make him feel like he's part of that journey of using Q for Business, because it's now sitting in your browser. And I think that's where, it can be very interesting. However, I am still confused by the pricing, by the naming strategy of all of these services. And I hope that one day I'm going to understand fully what Amazon Q is compared to Amazon Q Business, compared to Amazon Q Developer, compared to Amazon Q in the console, which is 4 different products that still do similar things. So, yeah, I don't know.
I guess it's similar to the Microsoft naming convention with Copilot, because Copilot is now lots of things. It's Clippy, it's your desktop, Microsoft 365 assistant, it's your coding assistant, etc. I don't know, I'm not a huge user of the Microsoft ecosystem, so I don't know if Copilot does other things as well. But I think that brand does spread quite widely across various different aspects of computing. But it's interesting what you said, Johannes, about targeting a different audience, because in my experience, AWS has never been particularly successful in targeting the kind of the end user audience. So it's never been an end user business really in the same way that Microsoft and Google has. I remember at the start of the COVID pandemic, AWS bundling things like the workspaces with the whatever the file management front end to S3 was for a kind of a OneDrive equivalent, etc. But it's not an area where AWS has ever really succeeded. So is Q gonna be the thing that makes them succeed in end user computing, or do you think this is going to go the way of all the previous end user computing offerings?
I don't know. We'll see. It's really tough to see where AWS is developing into at the moment. It's really hard to assess, right? It's somehow, let's say, I'd love to understand the strategic motivation between the different investments that have been done in the past 6 to 10 months, right? And I think that's what we're still not seeing clearly, right? I hope that it will unveil one day, right? And this Q business is, I think it's a good thing, right? Because it helps to use Bedrock as the foundation to build something that third-party vendors would otherwise do with Bedrock, right? Now, the question is AWS investing enough into it, right? Are they fast enough, or will other startups kind of be faster and better at them, right? I heard someone using Perplexity earlier to summarize some articles over here, right? Why are you not using Bedrock to do that?
Oh, well, because there's not really a front end to Bedrock. I can just go in my browser and use Perplexity.
That's not true, because Q Business Apps directly brings you that front end. You can direct that app. So now that's where I'm going to, right? And I think that's kind of what is my main question around all of this at the end.
Yeah, well, the honest answer to that one is Perplexity is free. Or at least has a freemium model. You can pay for it if you want to, but so far I haven't found the need to.
Let's use that for a marketing block. You are an AWS community builder, and you are hopefully being renewed pretty much soon, and that means that you're getting some credits, so you can use those hopefully to actually pay for those things.
And then you can write a blog about it and get renewed for the following year.
That's about it.
Yeah.
So you could do better, Carl, to be honest.
No, you're right, actually, Johannes, because I actually really do like the sound of the whole Q business proposition of being able to hook into your various data sources and everything else. I think the challenge it's got, even in a business of our size, is sort of fear, uncertainty, and doubt around the security aspects of this. Do we really want to open up every data source in our business to an AI model? Even if it is secured with guardrails within Bedrock and everything else, I think there's still a big challenge to overcome that.
And I think if I would say that big company like Logicata thinks about not using Q for business because of this, right? Then others have a similar issue, right? And I think that's something that hopefully the AWS team has a good answer to, right?
Yeah, and I think the answer really is all around the sort of guardrails of protection and everything else. It's just a question of whether people actually trust and believe that yet, because every AI vendor, every AI app out there, they all have terms and conditions that say, yes, of course we don't use your data for model training, etc. But that's just what's written in the contract. Do we actually trust what's written in the contract, and is this what's actually happening? Because maybe there's a disconnect between the legal team and the engineering team who are going, guys, we can't actually say that. That's often the way these things pan out. So, but yeah, I mean, the whole value proposition of, having an agent that can pool data from various sources and give you answers based on all of them, rather than have to look in here and I have to look in there and I have to look everywhere. That is a really powerful value proposition from my perspective. But it's just a question of whether the world is ready for that yet. So, yeah.
True.
Yeah. Anyway, on that note, let's move along to our fourth article for this week. This is an article on cybersecuritynews.com about how AWS simple notification service has been abused to exfiltrate data and phishing attacks. So, John, thoughts on this? How on earth would one go about abusing SNS to exfiltrate data?
Well, you're not really abusing the service. You're using the service for its intended purpose, which is sending data. The point is, you've got to go through a couple of layers of you've got some creds, you're within their environment first, and then you need to get more data back out. So this is an exfiltration vector rather than an attack in and of its own right. Okay. But the point is, once you create an SNS topic and something is subscribed to that, be that your email address or whatever, there's basically nothing that inspects what's going out in that message, provided it's encoded in the right sort of ways, right? Because if you try and send a plain text password, it might pick that up, but if you encode it in base64, it basically can't see unless you start de-encoding things. So that's what this example is going through. It's you've already got through, let's assume that it's a badly configured website running on an EC2 in a public subnet. Let's give them all the credit in the world here and say, okay, so you've gotten through the website, you've escaped that, and you're into the instance behind it. The instance is running with an instance profile that allows it to do a bunch of stuff. That shouldn't be happening anyway. Let's start there, but that shouldn't be happening anyway. You can then go and create an SNS topic, and you might be able to send some more data through that topic because you've created the topic, you've subscribed yourself to the topic, which doesn't really have any checks on it, and then you sort of just publish things through that topic. Okay, but you've got to have jumped through a lot of hoops to have done that, and you've got to have not had a WAF pick this up, or your server has to have permissions to do lots of things that it shouldn't be doing, and so on and so on. So I'm not worried about this particularly. This feels like a reach for a security article. It's like, oh, there's an exfiltration vector. It's, in other news, emails can send data. Cool. Water is also wet.
Yeah, I think, however, the article can remind everyone to check what your instance profile looks like, and to check what permissions instance profiles have, because you sometimes underestimate that kind of stuff, right? It also reminds us of having roles that are purposely fit to what you actually want to do, right? And this is essentially something that, and I know that John, you love Kubernetes stuff, right? Over there, it's pretty common to have an instance role that has a lot of permissions, right? Because no one is actually going to be using that, or maybe you don't know how to use that, right? It really reminds us to be able to actually drill down the roles and permissions that we are using, and rather have more roles than have less roles. And then, as in this example, right, if I need to send a message from to SNS, right, I might have a different role than the instance role that is gonna be assumed to actually do what you want to do, right? And I think that's a good reminder, right? Because a lot of people tend to forget that and tend to assign especially too much permissions to a bunch of services, right, that can then be used for all kind of exfiltration or phishing stuff.
Yeah, this is an exercise in make sure you're following the principle of least privilege, and that kind of solves this.
I agree. And actually, if someone gets into your EC2 instance, then you have a problem anyway, right? So there's so much other attack vectors that comes out of that. That brings us to the question: why do you actually have an EC2 instance in a public subnet these days? There's no need to do that anymore, right? No service needs to have an EC2 instance in a public subnet. But anyway, but then brings us to how widely used is the network firewall, right? In EC2, right? Because you could also forbid that. Anyway, there is a lot of things to talk about about this, to be honest.
Are you implying that the network firewall is not widely used?
I wouldn't say I'm implying that, but I would say that not everyone thinks about outgoing information or outgoing traffic from EC2 instances or from any other kind of service, right?
Yeah, it's tricky because you have to think about outgoing stuff, and the obvious stuff for outgoing on EC2s is you look at your security group rules and they're outbound open by default, and you look at your NACLs and they're outbound open by default. That's
True.
Okay. You want your service to be able to talk to the internet. Cool. Do they need to talk to you on every single port in creation? Because the only one that AWS actually blocks for you is 25, and that's for email sending reasons. Everything else is just open. Cool. What do you actually need your instances to be able to do? Oh, we want them to be able to patch themselves. Okay, so you need 443 and possibly 80, depending on the distro and all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Do you need everything in creation to be open? No. And
Definitely
that's just
not.
port level.
Yeah. Better standards would be helpful here as well. But on this note, right? Why did you pick this article? What did you want to? What do you think was going to be important over here, John?
It was just this isn't anything new. This isn't scary. Security team is reaching here, I think.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah.
And as I said at the top of the episode, it was slim pickings last week. So no offense to the author of this article, of course, but yeah. But it has led to an interesting discussion about security principles in general, firewalling, least privilege, and so on and so forth. So that is all good stuff.
We can use that article as well to talk about the cost of VPC endpoints, which is at the moment my highest bill in some of my AWS accounts.
Oh, they're a bugbear of mine. It's we want you to use endpoints. You want to use secure communication. You want to keep everything within the backbone. Only 2 of them are free, and that's S3 and Dynamo. Everything else you have to pay for.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
You know how much money you can spend on that?
Yes.
How much money are you spending on that, Johannes?
I'm not going to comment.
Too much money.
It's bigger than the salary increase that John got last year, Carl. So
not that big then. On that note, let's
that's what you said.
Move along to the final article for this week, which is something we don't normally talk about, but we're going to try and talk about today. It's an article on the AWS Contact Center blog, all about the introduction of the next generation of Amazon Connect AI-powered interactions that strengthen customer relationships and build business outcomes. So Connect, of course, is the Amazon's contact center offering, and AI moving heavily into that space now to automate some of the interactions. I'm sure all of us have had some horrendous experiences trying to navigate our way through IVRs and talking to voice recognition and getting very annoyed and just saying, please let me speak to a human. But hopefully AI is going to solve all of that and make contact centers so much smoother for both the person calling in and the operators who end up having to speak to them after they've been through that experience. So, yeah, John, what are your thoughts here? Anything jumping out at you? Anything particularly exciting from a contact center perspective that AI is going to help with?
Well, contact centers are horrible to start with. Okay, let's just leave that as red. They're not pleasant things to have to either use and deal with as a customer, as a consumer. I've never worked in one, but I've worked in businesses that ran one and did like a shift in them to see how they worked and all the rest of it. And they did not seem like fun places to work either, right? Nobody really enjoyed working there. Maybe it's because they were paid minimum wage, but they're not fun places to have to deal with, and they're not fun places to have to run. Cool. Let's leave that as red and just sort of move on. We're kind of seeing AI get its tentacles into this really quite hard. We have been for a little while now. There's more to start with in the chatbot side of things than on the phone. And you have these great stories of people, getting a car for $1 and flights for 50p and those sorts of things because the chatbot was being seen as an employee effectively under the legislation, and therefore is giving legally binding offers. And that was all good fun. I do wonder whether we're going to get the same kind of thing happening here, because even if the AI is, is on the phone and it's doing useful things, actually talking to people back and forth, maybe, then are we going to get the same sort of hallucinations where it's, yes, our policies say you can absolutely have this Ford Mustang for 50 pence. Wonderful. I'd very much like that. But I don't know. What they're talking about in the article more specifically, though, a lot of it comes down to analytics and post-contact work, which, if you've dealt with the amount of data that contact centers put out, that's a real challenge. That's a real challenge because a call, I mean, take this podcast, for example, we're at sort of 45 minutes now getting on for. I don't know how many words that's going to be in the transcript, but it's going to be in the thousands from one tri-party 45-minute conversation. It's going to be in the thousands of words that you're going to have to go through. And if you want to find the point where someone's being particularly offensive, I mean, that's the whole podcast, but it takes a human sitting there scrubbing that. Even if you do it at 2 or 3 speed, it takes a while to do. And none of the other tools out there are really doing this particularly well either. Okay, you can put transcripts and things in and you can scan them, but all of this takes time. So anything that I think makes the data that comes back out of it easier to digest for the analytics side of things, I think that's probably a good thing.
What are your thoughts, Johannes? Experience with contact centers?
Not only bad ones, I need to admit, right? And I recently had someone speaking at my user group around the old version of Amazon Connect. And to be honest, that already looked pretty decent, right? In terms of ease of setup, possibility to integrate your own data sources, possibility to interact your own contact flows and communications over there, right? It looked pretty good and pretty simple to use that. Maybe it's nothing that you as a customer directly want to interact with, but the possibility to have omni-channels and have multiple channels to talk to, like I can send you a text to confirm something. At the same time, I can wait for the answer from the text in the chat. Then I can have that information directly fed into the agent, right? I think it's more about helping people in the contact center to make things simpler. Now, this is in March 2025, right? This hasn't been launched at reInvent. I think it wasn't really ready for reInvent because it has AI in it, right? But it seems like a bigger launch for the service team, right? So I'm eager to see where this is going and how much of the stuff that was there before is now just rebranded and put in different stones, right? And how much of the service is really going to change with the possibility of having AI support for taking decisions, for summarizing, for extracting information and that kind of thing. So let's see where this goes, right? What I think is, if you're starting a startup, Amazon Connect is important because it gives you the possibility to cover a 24/7 business even with 2 employees. Because you can have a toll-free number in any kind of country that you want to have, right? Amazon Connect has numbers in most of the countries, so you can get your customers to call in that number. They reach an agent at the end, right? And you can even within that contact flow then tell them, okay, please, we will call you back at 10 a.m. your time or at 10 p.m. your time, right? If you're in a different time zone. So I think that's where the strong piece over here is, right? Why this might be a very important investment as well, right? Because it leverages that possibility of not having to build up 20 people that do 24/7 support for a service that is only maintained by John, right? As an example. And so that's where this announcement, I think, is one of the more important ones of the last week.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly an area that is ripe for improvement because there are a lot of bad contact centers out there. But I can really see, the application of AI in this. And of course, there's a mention of Q as well. The Q brand has extended into Q for Connect. This is another bit of AI infusion with the Q brand.
So who do I get if I call Logicata?
You get an answering service initially.
Oh gosh, not Amazon Connect.
No, we're not using Amazon Connect. No, but thankfully nobody ever calls us. So the only people who ever call Logicata are trying to sell us something.
Okay.
So our customers generally tend to interact with us via email or Slack, which tends to be their preferred mode of communication these days. And then if we want to talk, we do video meetings like this. So very rare that a customer will actually have any form of contact with our business via phone these days, because we are B2B. I think contact centers generally will be more B2C. Certainly one of the examples they mentioned anyway, Virgin Media is B2C. So if you think the number of customers that Virgin Media are going to have and the number of calls that they're going to be handling on a daily basis, then anything that they can do to improve efficiency is going to be greatly appreciated. But I mean, some of this stuff like the post-contact summaries, I can imagine just kind of automating follow-up actions. You mentioned about, I'll phone you back at 10 o'clock at night. AI just being able to pick that up, recognize the action, schedule the call without the operator having to do anything. Reduces the risk of human error, improves the level of service if the customer does actually get an automated call back at that time, because there's nothing more frustrating than being on the receiving end of commitments made by agents that are not followed up, or as you well know, John, an hour on the phone to HMRC every time you want to have a conversation about your tax code or something like that.
It's every year. It's every year.
Well, let's not go down that particular rabbit hole, because we have actually achieved our goal of recording the longest episode of Logicast so far, which I think Johannes is very keen to beat the previous record, which I think was 43 minutes.
No. I'm keen to beat Brian one day, right? Who has been on 4 times, right? So that's
okay. Yeah. So we got to get you on. We got to get you on a couple more times to beat Brian Tarbox in terms of returning guest numbers. Brian's on 4 episodes, I think. This brings you up to 3.
That is correct. Or if John is on vacation, you can get Brian and me and make a score.
Absolutely. Yeah. Double hero.
Well, right.
Double hero call. Yeah. Cool. Well, so we have reached the end of our time for season 4, episode 12 of Logicast. So thank you very much, Johannes, for joining us yet again. A pleasure, as always, to hear your insights. And I'm glad we had at least one article which was in your chosen area of expertise. Thank you, John, as always, for your input as well. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please do tell your friends. We are available from wherever you download your podcasts. And we also, if you want to see the funny faces we're pulling, and Johannes's hairstyle, which is maybe changing at the weekend. But if you'd like to see Johannes's hairstyle, check us out on our YouTube channel as well. That's all we got time for this week. We'll be back next week with another episode for you. Thanks for listening. See you again next time.